Have you ever had one of those moments in life where you said something or did something and then you thought to yourself, what was I thinking? How could I have been so incredibly foolish? I mean, I've had way too many of those moments, unfortunately, in my life. I remember when I was perhaps around 12 years old, my dad asked me to go in the backyard and to mow the back and pick some weeds and, to deal with the weeds. And so I remember my parents were, both at work and the day was happening. And I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to my dad this time. And I went in the back, mowed the yard and was picking all these weeds. And it was kind of a damp, section of our area of the yard. So I picked all the weeds, put them in a pile. And I thought to myself, a good idea would be to burn these weeds. It'd be kind of cool. My parents aren't home. I can get away with it. So I get some matches and I begin to, try to light these weeds on fire. But again, they're kind of damp and it wasn't going well. And I'm like, what should I do? So I came up with a brilliant idea. I thought, what? My dad just filled the gas can in the garage full of gas. So I'm going to go get that gas can and then I'm going to take the lid off. And I'm going to carry it all the way in the backyard. And as I'm carrying the, gas can to the backyard, it's spilling all over the can, all over my hand. And I get to the weeds and I pour gas all around the weeds. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be good, so good. And so I do the whole thing. And I put the gas can, to be safe over here. And I get the match and I take one match and I'm like, phew, nothing happened. I'm like, oh, okay, let me try again. And I go, phew. And then it went, phew. And I was like, this is awesome, and I'm watching it going like it's a 12-year-old man and I've seen fire, it's just so cool. And then, what naturally happens, it just kind of dies down and I'm watching it. I'm going, it's getting less and less. And again, it was kind of damp and less and less and less. And I'm like, oh. So I thought, here's another great idea. I should take the gas can and stand at a distance for safety reasons and chug it into the fire. And so I was like, good idea, Buck. And so I take the gas can and I chug it and two things happen. The first thing was pretty incredible because once the gas hit the fire, it just exploded. I went, that is awesome. The second thing was not so awesome because all of a sudden I watched a stream of fire follow the gas all the way back to the gas can, which my hand was on. Now the gas can begins to ignite all around it because all the spilt gas, and my hand is on fire because I spilt gas all over my hand. And so all of a sudden I start going backwards, just this natural reaction to go backwards, and I trip. And then I have a Matrix moment, which is kind of cool. Like, I'm going like Neo, and I actually set the gas can down and it didn't spill, and then I fell. I come back up and I'm hitting my hand and I'm seeing it's on fire. I put that out. I assess what's going on and I run and get the hose. And surprisingly, the can didn't blow up. And I squirted the can off and I squirted the fire out. And I remember looking at everything that happened. The weeds, the gas can, and now I'm starting to see these blisters bubble up on my hand. And I think to myself, what was I thinking? How could I have been so incredibly foolish? Hey guys, I think we all have had those moments in our life. Perhaps not as dramatic, but we've thrown our keys in the garbage. And then 5 minutes later, we go to throw something else and we see our keys and we're like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? How could I have been so foolish? Simple things like that. Or perhaps that financial thing, like, hey, there's an investment. Man, it's going to pay 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 100 times. You're going to make so much money. It's too good to be true. And it was too good to be true because you lost all your money. And you're like, man, what was I thinking? Or perhaps that religious experience, hey, just buy the book, pray the prayer, and man, you're going to win the lottery. You're going to get healed. Like everything's going to work out just wonderful. And you're like, that was such religious shenanigans. I mean, are you kidding me? What was I thinking? And my point is I could go on, but I think in every one of our lives, we have asked this question of ourselves. And guys, here's the thing. This question right here, this is a really, really important question. Because if you're willing to pause long enough and begin to answer that question and go hey, what was I thinking? What was happening up here? I mean, that's honestly one of the things that begins to put wind in the sails of your life. But if you skip over this, if you're like, nah, it's no big deal. Hey, whatever, things happen. Just kind of move on. And you don't pause long enough to actually come up with an answer to this question. Oftentimes, that's the very thing that takes the wind out of the sails of your life. And that's important. Because today we're in part 2 of this series that we kicked off last week where we're talking about how in the world do we put wind in our sails. In other words, how in the world do you and I, when we see the sales of our life, relational sales or academic sales or professional sales or, moral sales or spiritual, whatever the sales, there's all kinds of things of life. When we start to see the winds out of the sails of our life, and we see the sails are kind of flapping in the wind, and we're like, what do we do? How do we begin to adjust our sails to put the wind back in our sails so that in life we can experience that refreshment that we all long for, that we can begin to experience that joy and contentment and that happiness that we're striving for, so that we can begin to experience the direction and purpose and meaning in life, so we can begin to experience that freedom and liberation. And ultimately, as we said last week, when we put wind on our sails and we're able to make these adjustments, we begin to step in and experience what Jesus invited us into. In John 10:10, I love what he says. He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. In other words, Jesus said, hey guys, I've come into the world and I am the author of life. I created life. I knit you together in your mother's womb. I know every single hair on your head, which means I'm personal. And because I created life and designed life, I know exactly how it works. And part of the purpose as to why Jesus came into the world is to explain life, is to show you how life works. And the bonus, the cherry on top, is Jesus said, not only do I want to show you how life works, so you got to trust me, but I want to show you how you can step into something and have life to the full. Experience the things you long for: peace, contentment, happiness, joy, thriving financially or thriving relationally because of what he invited you into. Now, as we said last week, when you think about this, you're like, life and life to the full, that's kind of a hard concept to get my mind around. That's just not that easy, and you would be right. It isn't that easy. And guys, as a result, if we're going to begin to step into what Jesus invited us into, we have to realize that we're going to have some tough conversations. We're going to have some challenging conversations. As I said last week, my preference would be just to have fun and all laugh together. And, and then you walk out today and everybody goes, man, that was fun. And Buck, giddy up, you're a swell guy. That'd be great, right? But I so want tomorrow, next month, next year, 5 years from now, for you to have that sustained win in your sails, for you to look back to some of the decisions you made in this moment, in this series, and go, you know what, that was a hard conversation. But man, that was such an important conversation because it allowed me to step into something that Jesus invited me into and perhaps experience something I've never experienced before in my life. And I so desire that for you and for me, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, which means we're going to have some challenging conversations. And so last week we started the whole series off with a fairly challenging conversation. And I said one of the things we've got to do to begin to adjust our sails in life is you've got to own your piece of the past. In other words, it's not emotionally satisfying. It requires you to be incredibly courageous. But when you lose the wind out of the sails of life, whatever that is, relational winds or moral winds or habitual, whatever it is, and they're out, the first thing you've got to do is to go, what is my piece of the pie? Because if you own your piece of the past, your piece of the pie, it's what makes peace with your past. It's what keeps you from smuggling the things in your past into your present, which then takes the wind out of your sails in the future. And at the end of our time last week, I said, here's a really helpful, practical tool. And I gave you this. I said, this is the circle of blame. So next time you identify, hey, here's an area of my life that wind has come out of the sails, the first thing you've got to do is draw the circle, like really get a piece of paper, draw it. And I know 99% was her fault. 99% was his fault. But what's the 1%? You have to identify that and say, this is my piece of the past. And if you're willing to do that, it's what makes peace with the past. Adjust your sails to put wind in your sails. Now, guys, there's so much more we said about that last week. And so if you weren't here, I really want to encourage you to go online or you can listen to what we said so far in this series. Now, today, I just want to continue this discussion. And today what I want to do is I want to circle back to our question. Because I cannot overemphasize to you guys how important this question is. Because your willingness or unwillingness to answer this question is what ultimately will adjust your sails to put wind in your sails. On a very practical level, this is a very simple thought, but think about this. If you think the way you used to think, you'll do the things you used to do. And now your next marriage is very similar to your last marriage. And now your next friendship or your next dating relationship or that next financial thing or that habit, that moral thing that you just can't beat and it just keeps showing up over and over and over. We've got to pause long enough in life to be honest, intellectually honest, and answer the question, what was I thinking? So, today what I want to do is I want to look at a passage in the Bible. It's a letter in the Bible that actually addresses this question head on. And it's a great, great letter. It's the letter of Romans. And if you didn't grow up in church, you're not familiar with the Bible, the letter of Romans was actually written by a man named Paul, the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul wrote this letter to these first century followers of Jesus in Rome. And if you know your history, being a follower of Jesus in Rome was not an easy thing. I mean, if you chose to follow Jesus, it could cost you your life. It could cost your wife her life, your husband his life. It could cost your children being arrested, tortured, and ultimately killed. It could cost you losing your home, your business, your livelihood, your reputation, your legacy. So you got to think about this historically. Followers of Jesus in Rome did not put their trust in Jesus Christ because of a feeling. It wasn't like, oh, faith is a feeling. All of them will look at you like a deer in the headlights going, you think faith's a feeling? Are you kidding me? My life is on the line. I had to corroborate that this guy Jesus in Jerusalem actually rose from the dead. There's objective evidence to why I'm basing my entire life, my family's life, my children's life, my marriage, the whole thing is based on the evidence that Jesus is who he claimed to be. So this was very difficult to be a follower of Jesus in first century Rome. And so, of course, not only did they honestly know why they put their faith in Jesus, but at the same time, they had a lot of questions. And Paul addressed a lot of their questions in the letter of Romans. It's a fascinating letter. If you want some depth in terms of Christianity, just read the letter of Romans. It answers so many of some of our biggest and most profound questions. Well, in Romans chapter 12, Paul addresses this whole context of what was I thinking? What's going on up here? What are the inputs? What's driving my thinking? And so what I want to do today, I want to show you verse 1, and verse 1 gives us a little bit of context. And then we're going to jump into verse 2 in Romans chapter 12 and address specifically some really practical ways to address what we're thinking. So here's the way Paul jumps in. Look at this. Romans 12, verse 1, he starts this way. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters. In other words, this is important to pause here anytime you read the Bible. And you go, Paul is writing this to followers of Jesus, brothers and sisters. So, which means if you're a follower of Jesus today, if you've placed your faith and trust in Jesus, or maybe you're watching or listening online or you're here, this is not optional. Guys, this is what we're called to do as followers of Jesus. Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're here today or you're watching or listening online, I am so incredibly grateful. I so respect the fact that you're here. But you just need to know this is all optional. I mean, you can pick and choose. You can go, Paul, I kind of like that. It's really helpful. And I don't like that one. That's totally fair. Because why in the world would I or the church hold you to a standard in Jesus Christ you've never signed up for? That's crazy talk. If you are a follower of Jesus, though, this is what we're called to do. Here's what Paul says. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, that's important, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is true worship. So, Paul, what are you saying here? Well, first and foremost, he starts with this concept, in view of God's mercy. Now, this is really important. And if you've been a Christian a while or a follower of Jesus a while, this is one of the things he's speaking directly to you. Because what happens is there is this kind of honeymoon phase with Christianity, not for everyone, but for a lot of followers of Jesus, to where it's like, man, this is so awesome. Look at what God's done for me, how much he loved me. I was totally stuck and God, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Christianity is amazing. But over time, the honeymoon phase kind of fades and apathy starts to set in. And before long, it's like, oh yeah, Jesus died for me. That's good. Oh, yeah, I'm good with God. Yeah, God's good with me. My eternity's secure. It's good, right? And it's like, it's luster. It's just kind of like, yeah, that's just kind of a long time ago something that happened. Paul says, don't do that. Be intentional. Whatever it takes, be practical. Every day of your life, remember his view. Remember his mercy. Put that in full view of your life. Remember, don't forget there was a day you were lost. There was a day you were condemned. There was a day you did not have a right standing with God. You did not have peace with God. Don't forget that. And remember, the reason why you didn't have a right standing with God is because of your sin. I mean, sin's a really big deal. The smallest of sins to the biggest of sins. Because sin, you not only sin against you, you sin against the people around you. But the reason why it's such a big deal is because you sin against an eternal, perfect, holy God. And there's nothing you can do to satisfy his perfect, holy, and eternal justice. Nothing. You could be better than Mother Teresa and Billy Graham put together. It wouldn't even matter. You wouldn't even come close to his standard of perfection with justice. And the reason why, again, this is so important, you may not know this, because God's justice, it's eternal, it's perfect, it demands holiness. So we're stuck. Have you forgotten that? Remember that day? But then God saw that, and God's like, I'm not only perfectly just, but I'm also perfect in my love. And because I'm perfect in my love, I'm going to do what love requires of me. Here's my son, Jesus. There's nothing that has more value and worth I can give for you to communicate you have value and worth every day of your life. So I'm going to take my son, Jesus, and he is eternal. He is perfect. He is holy. He's going to come and live a perfect, eternal, and holy life to satisfy my justice for your sin. In other words, the big word is atone. Atone is a substitute. In other words, you deserve the punishment to satisfy God's justice, but Jesus says, no, I'm going to step in. I'll go ahead and take on everything you've done, past, present, future sin. And I'll pay the price because I'm the only one who can satisfy his perfect justice. And through me, you have peace with God. And the beauty is, a perfect heavenly Father made it so simple. He's not against us. He is for us. And the beauty is, you don't have to go to the temple and sacrifice all these things. You don't have to do these 7 steps or these 5 prayers or these 14 different. No, it's simple. It's believe. Believe. Trust in me. Believe is put your confidence in me. And the second you transfer your confidence from you to my son Jesus, you have peace with God. You're a brand new creation. You're a son and daughter of God. You have a right standing with God. You have a brand new identity. Your eternity is secure. And Paul's saying, have you lost sight of that? Have you taken that for granted? As I say these words to you, you're like, yeah, I know that. Move on, Buck. Let's keep going. I need something deeper, right? I mean, Paul's saying, followers of Jesus, every day of your life, keep God's mercy in view. Why, Paul? So that you can follow. Follow is the idea of being a living sacrifice. Jesus is a two-sided coin. Yes, believe, but equally so follow. Follow literally feels like surrendering. It's the idea of being a living sacrifice. In other words, I totally surrender. Here is all of me. Here's all of my ideas, all of my thoughts, all of my desires. And as a living sacrifice, I'm living and I'm going to sacrifice all of my thoughts, all of my desires, all of my feelings, everything I think about sexuality, everything I think about morality, everything I think about money. I'm going to completely put it on the altar, and I'm going to sacrifice all of it for you. What motivates you to do that very thing is keeping God's mercy in view. And the question becomes, Paul, that feels like a loss. Why would I be a living sacrifice? Why would I take all of the things I feel and desire, all of my views, and put them and completely like lose them all? Why would I do that? Well, Jesus actually spoke to this, and one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is found in Luke chapter 9. Look at what he says. He talks to this dynamic. Jesus says, for if you choose to self-sacrifice, that's a living sacrifice right there. If you choose to do that, giving up your lives for my glory, look at this. You will discover true life, life to the full. It's the ultimate paradox in life. But if you choose to keep your lives for yourself, you will lose what you try to keep. In other words, Paul understood this. And Paul goes, guys, Jesus has invited you and I into life and life to the full. Everything you're chasing, everything you so desire, all of those feelings, I get it. But you're going to have to put all those on the altar. You're going to have to lose all of that. And you're going to have to take a step into Jesus' way of thinking. And if you're willing to lose all of that for Jesus Christ, that is true worship. That is where ultimately you will discover life and life to the full. But the motivation for you to do that, you got to keep God's mercy in view. And then Paul continues. And he expands on this and gives us even more handles to hold on to go, how do we do that? He says, let me tell you. He says, let me continue. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Now, I love Paul said this. He says, guys, if we're going to get this right, if we're going to do what I just said in verse 1, you got to understand, first and foremost, there is a pattern to this age. There's a pattern to the culture. There's a pattern to this world. The word pattern, if you defined it, is this. It means a repeated design, a model or design used as a guide. This is really important. Paul says, man, be alert. You need to know this. Every day of your life, you don't even have to do one thing. You don't have to use 1 ounce of energy. Just open your eyes. And there is a pattern that is guiding your thinking. And the pattern that is guiding your thinking in every aspect of life is the pattern of the world. It's such a real pattern that is guiding your thinking. Guiding your thinking in which way? It's guiding your thinking in relationships, identity, sexuality, value, worth, money, work, sex, morality. Every day of your life. You need to know when you wake up. Man, through social media, through all the different mediums, every day there's a pattern guiding your way of thinking. Be alert. Know that. And Paul also understood on the opposite side of that, there's another pattern. And the other pattern is the pattern of Jesus Christ. And that pattern is also guiding your thinking in the same respective ways that Jesus has spoken into every aspect of our life. He's spoken into relationships, money, worth, sexuality, value. And Jesus says, guys, I'm the author of life. I knit you together in your mother's womb. I know every hair on your head. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And the reason I know that is because I designed you. And I've spoken into every arena of life. Paul understood this. And he says, guys, if you're going to begin to step in and experience that life and life to the full, every day of your life, be aware, be alert, be self-aware. There's a pattern of this world. And it is looking to guide every aspect of what you feel, what you think, your perspective, your disposition in your life. Know that. And then he says, real clearly, and do not conform. Let me repeat that. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Don't flirt with it. Don't even contend with it. Don't go, well, maybe kind of sort of this is going to make me happy. It's going to bring some joy in my life. No. Paul says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Then what are we supposed to do, Paul? He says, I'm telling you, there's something better. It's a process. What's better? He says, here it is. But be transformed. But be transformed. Now, Paul is writing this in the Greek. The word transformed is such an interesting Greek word. And here's what he's saying. He's saying, don't conform to the pattern of this world. Don't wrap your mind around the pattern here, but be transformed. Transform literally means in the Greek, metamorphosis. It's a process. Metamorphosis is a change of form or nature or a thing or a person into a completely different one. In other words, he's saying that God has invited you to change something completely up here into something far, far better. But it's going to require a process of metamorphosis. Now, maybe in elementary or middle school, you learned about metamorphosis. Perhaps your science teacher said something like this. Look at this. Here's a caterpillar, and it goes through the maturing process. And one day becomes a butterfly, free and liberated and something so much better. Well, I love this concept. This is such an important concept. In fact, in the book called The Cure by Bruce McNichol, by the way, it's not the band The Cure, just in case you get confused. It's the book. The book, The Cure, I love what Bruce says. He takes this illustration of metamorphosis and kind of brings it home to your identity, and it's so applicable to this discussion. Look at what Bruce says. I love what he says. Nature provides many examples of this incredible discrepancy between who we appear to be and who we really are. Consider the caterpillar. If we brought a caterpillar to a biologist and asked him to analyze it and describe its DNA, he would tell us, I know it looks like a caterpillar to you, but scientifically, according to every test, including DNA, this is fully and completely, it's a butterfly. And then look at what he says. Bruce continues. He says, wow, God has wired into a creature looking nothing like a butterfly, a perfectly complete butterfly identity. And because the caterpillar is a butterfly in essence, it will one day display the behavior and attributes of a butterfly. The caterpillar matures into what it is already true about it. In the meantime, berating the caterpillar for not being more like a butterfly is not only futile, and I love this last part, it probably hurt its tiny little ears. So it is with us. The point is God designed something inside of you. He knits you together in your mother's womb. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. He came into this world for part of a reason to explain life, to say, this is how I designed you. And if you're willing to trust me, go through this metamorphosis process, be a living sacrifice, take everything, put it on the altar, say, I completely surrender to you. There's a process of metamorphosis to something so much better. You will discover life, and life to the full. It's in you. But it's going to require you to go through the process of metamorphosis. Well, how do we become the butterfly? How does that work, Paul? And this gets to the point of our question. He says, it works by renewing your mind. You got to renew your mind. Now, about a year ago, we did a whole series about renewing our mind. In fact, I even used this passage. If you weren't here, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to what we've said. And the reason I'm bringing this passage up again is because it's so relevant to putting wind in our sails. Renewing your mind, it literally, the Greek word renewing means renovate, remodel. It's this concept of like, think about your house. If you were to remodel or renovate your house, you're taking the paint off the walls, old paint. You're taking the ceiling, restructuring, old ceiling. You're taking the wallpaper, the flooring. You're taking all the different, decor, the whole thing. You're throwing it out. You're getting rid of the old, and you're replacing everything with something brand new and something better. It's renewing your mind. And that's why this question is more important than you know. You've got to pause long enough to ask and answer the question, what in the world was I thinking? What were the inputs that were creating the decisions that were causing me to say or to do the things I was saying or doing? You need to know. You see, the bottom line is this, is that if you're going to put wind in your sails, you've got to adjust your sails in life. How do you adjust your sails? You renew your mind. You begin to replace the old way of thinking with something brand new. Now, here's what's so cool, and here's what I love about the scriptures. This is experientially true. This is, in fact, scientifically true. In fact, it's taken science about 2,000 years to catch up with the Apostle Paul. It's taken science about 2,000 years to catch up with the Bible. Because what we know today is that there's an aspect of what's called neuroplasticity that means that there's a part of your brain that has plasticity that can actually change. For decades and decades, science told us that your brain stops growing at the end of puberty. And by the time you're 18, it really is just there's going to be apathy, and it's just going to, atrophy and all these kind of things. Your brain's not going to get much better. But today what we discovered in the late 90s is that your brain, it has plasticity. It can actually change. In fact, I love what Dr. Kristen Meisenheimer, here's what she says. Look at this. She says, neuroplasticity says our brain can change in response to our thoughts. What? Yeah. If you're willing to change your thinking, it actually changes your brain. Well, how's that work? Well, it changes it in three ways. Chemically, when you begin to change your thinking, not overnight, like tomorrow morning, it's like, oh, I thought a new thought. My brain's going to change. No, it takes time. But you begin to change your thinking. It changes the chemicals. These things called neurotransmitters, which carry information in your brain, they begin to work differently. And then it begins to change it in a different way. It begins to change the structure of your brain. Think of it like bridges and highways and neural pathways. These neurotransmitters begin to change the actual physiology of your brain. And then over time, it changes its function. And now all of a sudden you feel different. Now all of a sudden you think different. Now all of a sudden you speak different. Now all of a sudden you act different. Now all of a sudden you have more peace than perhaps you've ever had in your entire life. It is absolutely, objectively, experientially true that you are experiencing something different. How? Oh, it started with a thought. The Apostle Paul knew this 2,000 years ago. This is why he said to followers of Jesus in the town of Colossae, he said this. He said, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Why would you say such a thing, Paul? Because if you change your thoughts, you change your brain. If you change your brain, you change your life. This is why Paul said to the followers of Jesus in Philippi, look at these words. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, talking about the characteristics of Jesus, think about such things. Because if you change your thoughts, you change your brain, you change your brain, you change the function, your life. And this is ultimately why Paul said in Romans chapter 12, do not conform to the thinking. There's a pattern to this world that is contending for your mind, that is promising happiness and joy and contentment and freedom and liberation. Go for it. Do whatever feels good. Don't buy into that. There's a better way. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but go through a maturing metamorphosis process. By what? By changing your thoughts. By being a living sacrifice. Here's the way I thought. Here's the way I used to think. But there's something brand new. How does this live out in our lives? How do we do this? Well, Paul was so specific. He said, guys, you need to know there's a pattern of this world. Every day of your life, you don't even have to try. Just wake up, open your eyes, take a breath. Boom, it's happening. And there's a pattern that's trying to determine your thoughts, to guide your thinking about every aspect, about marriage, about your wife, about your husband, about children, about your mom and dad, about your dating, the person you're dating, about sexuality, about your identity, everything. You need to know that. And Paul was very clear. He said, don't conform to this. Don't even flirt with it. Why, Paul? Because the author of life has invited you into something so much better. Well, what does that practically look like? You guys remember, and this is going to kind of date me, and maybe you remember this too. If you grew up in church, you knew this. You remember those bracelets people used to wear, Christians used to wear? And if you're not a follower of Jesus, you perhaps thought these were the weird people who wore these bracelets, but it said WWJD. Remember that? What would Jesus do? And everywhere you're walking around during the day, what would Jesus do? I got to think, what would Jesus do? Now, that's a wonderful thing to think about. But as I thought about that, and this may be a little cheesy, practically speaking, how do we begin to apply what Paul's saying? It's every day of your life to be intentional about asking the question, WWJT, what would Jesus think? You deserve to know that. If you're a follower of Jesus, goodness, you need to know this. In every aspect of your life, do you know what Jesus is actually thinking about your wife and what's going on right now in your marriage? He knows what's going on. Do you know what he's thinking about that? Do you know what he thinks about marriage and why marriage is so incredible? And his design of marriage, do you know that? Do you know what he's thinking about parenting? Do you know what he's thinking about your sexuality? Do you know what he's thinking about you professionally, what work? I mean, he created work. There's such purpose behind it. Do you know that? You need to know that. As we begin to wrap our minds around the thoughts of Jesus, and we begin to say, okay, Jesus, you're the author of life. What you've promised is life and life to the full. It's better than anything I desire. Ooh, it's going to require a lot of trust. I trust you. And you put that on the altar. It's a living sacrifice. And you begin to wrap your thoughts around the thoughts of Jesus Christ. Over time, neuroplasticity happens. And that's what it means to follow. I will follow you because your ways are better. And yes, it feels like I'm dying to something. Yes, it feels like I'm giving something up. But I'm doing it because you are the author of life. So, practically, what does that mean for you and for me? I was thinking about that this week. And I thought, as we walk out today, as we go about our weeks, go about our days, what can we do intentionally and practically with what Paul is teaching us? So I began to think about this, and in fact, I was in my office this week, and I walked up to my whiteboard, and I'm thinking, okay, what should I say? I don't know. And so I started drawing a picture of myself, because I'm thinking about, my thoughts. And it's a stick figure, and I was drawing this picture, and my good friend Jordan walked in my office. He didn't know what I was doing. And he sees me drawing a stick figure of me, and he's like, Buck, are you okay? Everything going all right? I was like, yeah, I'm just thinking about Sunday. He's like, oh, I got it. So anyways, I draw a stick figure, and if you're curious what it looked like, it's something like this. This is me. There I am. Right? Big old ears, big old German nose, there it is, big hair, all that stuff, right? So I'm drawing a picture of me, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? Paul, what are you saying? And I thought, here's exactly what he's getting at. He's going, Buck, you need to be intentional. You need to think about your daily intake. In other words, what's Buck's daily intake when it comes to W, which stands for the world, J, which stands for Jesus? What's my percentage? Like, you need to be honest with yourself, Buck. And quit playing these religious, spiritual Jesus games going, well, I'm a Christian. Why isn't my marriage great? Well, I'm a Christian. Why am I struggling financially? Well, I'm a Christian. You can do something, Buck. You need to think about what's coming in here, because what science says is what comes here is going to change your brain, which is going to change your life. So what's happening in here? Do you know this? And Buck, is your percentage 100, the world, 0, Jesus? Be honest. Are there days you just wake up and boom, social media, boom, news, boom, what's going on in the world, boom, what's happening in the market, go for a jog, listen to a little Joe Rogan on the podcast, which is, fun and good, and, do that, and then come home, take a shower, listen to, another podcast, go to work, try to solve all these problems, then come home, and man, I am tired, and so you know what, I'm going to have a beer, I'm going to Netflix out tonight, going to take a shower, and go to bed. Is that your day, Buck? You need to be honest, and I'm just telling you, when I'm honest and paying attention and intentional with this stuff, what I begin to realize is now all of a sudden my fears are higher. Now all of a sudden my anxieties are higher. Now my reactions with my boys, they do things that irritate me, and I'm like, oh, man, I react really quick about that. Now all of a sudden it's like Christianity and the whole thing, and it feels more like work than a relationship. Why is that? Well, perhaps it's because 100% of what's going in here is shaping the direction of my life. Versus maybe 20% to 80%. Wake up, I'm actually going to open the Bible. And I'm going to read it because my Father communicates through the scriptures to me. It's amazing that we resist the Bible, and I get that. But when you actually open the Bible and read it, it's amazing how he prepared you for whatever you're going to face that day. It's like he was talking to you. And then I'm going to open my palms and say, God, you know what's going to happen today. You know the challenge I'm going to face. I've got my calendar. I can see that. I want to invite you into that. And then I'm going to listen to a podcast to Dr. William Lane Craig, who's brilliant at taking on some of the hardest questions that we face as followers of Jesus and giving reasonable answers, good answers. And I'm going to listen to some great music that reminds me of God's rich mercy. And then throughout the day, you know what? I'm going to face a lot of challenges. I'm not going to know how to figure it out. I've got a lot of ideas, but you know what? I'm more interested in your ideas. God, what are your ideas? Then when I get home, Jill and I are going to have dinner with the boys around the table. We're going to talk about life. We're going to pray together. And before we go to bed, I'm going to reach over to Jill and just invite God into that moment of rest to prepare us for whatever he has for us tomorrow. And when those are the patterns, it dramatically over time begins to shift what I experience in life. That is true for me. And I also thought of you. And I drew a picture of you as well. And here it is. Hopefully it's flattering, right? But the same question is for you, and I'll leave you with this. One of the most practical, tangible things you can do, starting today, is be honest with yourself. What's your percentage? Honestly. I mean, if you're playing the lottery game with Christianity, hey, I believe and now my life should be great. I mean, Christianity is about belief, but it's equally so about follow. What is your percentage? Are your thoughts about marriage, about morality, about money, about sex, whatever it is, are those the thoughts of Jesus? Or are those the thoughts of the world? And if you're not a follower of Jesus, what does this look like for you? It's to finally answer the question and be intellectually honest about who's Jesus. Honestly, who is he historically? Who is Jesus? And if we're willing to pause and answer the question, what was I thinking? It is our way forward to begin to adjust our sails, to renew our mind, to put wind in the sails of our lives. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for this moment. God, here's the thing. You are fully aware of how complex life is and how complex we are. And you are the answers to figuring this thing out. So, Father, for all of us, wherever we're at in life, whatever's going on, you know. So meet us tangibly this week. Remind us of who you are and what you've done for us. And give us the steps and the wisdom to know what it looks like to wrap our thoughts, to wrap our hearts, to wrap our whole lives around your ways. It's better. I trust you with that. In Jesus' name, amen.